The plaza of Zerolon Prime was a monument to cruelty. White stone towers cast shadows over the gathering of millions, their alien voices rumbling in anticipation. Hollow drones hovered above, ensuring every gesture, every scream, would be carried across the stars. At the center stood General Marcus Hale, bound in magnetic chains, his uniform torn, blood drying on his temple. His back was straight despite days of torture. Around him, the banners of the Zerathian Empire snapped in the artificial wind, their crimson sigils gleaming under a pitiless sun. Archduke Varax ascended the execution dais. His carapace glistened in the light, jeweled armor reflecting his station. His voice carried through the amplifiers, calm, deliberate, contemptuous. Behold the fate of humanity's champion. This general of Earth, who dared resist the order of the stars, will serve as an example. Let all who dream of rebellion remember, resistance to the Empire ends in silence. The crowd roared approval. To them, this was tradition, domination reaffirmed. But across the galaxy, billions of humans watched in horrified silence as the feed poured into every home, every station, every colony. Hale lifted his head. His voice, though hoarse, rang clear. You think this will break us? He scanned the cameras as if staring into the eyes of his people. You've just united Earth. And when Earth unites... He drew breath, defiant to the end. Run! The Archduke gave a signal. The energy halberd plunged into Hale's chest, searing flesh and armor alike. His body convulsed, then fell still. The plaza erupted in cheers. The broadcast ended. On Earth, grief lasted only moments before it curdled into rage. In New York, mourners lit candles beneath the holographic projection of Hale's face. The vigil swelled into a march, chants of his last words echoing through steel canyons. In Sao Paulo, dockworkers stormed the Zerathian trade offices, tearing down banners and burning them in the streets. In Moscow, thousands abandoned silence for defiance, flooding Red Square with cries for vengeance. News feeds replayed the execution endlessly. Children repeated Hale's last words as if they were prophecy. Soldiers watched with clenched fists, whispering oaths of vengeance. Politicians who once argued over budgets found themselves united under a single truth: humanity had been challenged, and humanity would answer. In Geneva, the Terran Confederation Council convened in emergency session. The chamber buzzed with fury. Holographic delegates from colonies across the Sol frontier shouted demands for retaliation. Some called for immediate strikes. Others warned of annihilation if caution failed. President Elena Varga rose from her seat. Tall, silver-haired, her voice cut through the storm. They wanted us divided, she said. The chamber quieted. They believed killing Hale would frighten us into submission. But today, humanity stands united as never before. The Terran Confederation will not cower. We will fight, not for conquest, not for glory, but for survival. A pause, then her words rang like steel. They have awakened Earth. The vote was unanimous. The Total War Act passed in under an hour. Every factory, every orbital station, every colony shipyard shifted to military production. Civilian luxuries were suspended, trade routes converted to supply lines. The Confederation called for volunteers. Within hours, the response overwhelmed every station. In the industrial yards of Luna, factories that once built luxury transports now poured molten alloy into the frames of destroyers. Mars redirected its terraforming foundries into weapons plants, turning plows into cannons. Even the outer colonies, long resentful of Earth's dominance, pledged resources and blood. Recruitment stations overflowed. Lines stretched for blocks, students, farmers, engineers, miners. They came not just from loyalty but fury. Entire families enlisted together. Veterans of Earth's old wars returned, uniforms dusted off, voices steady as they pledged once more to defend their species. On the orbital docks, scaffolds clanged with feverish rhythm. Half-built carriers became fully armed within weeks. Engineers worked 20-hour shifts without complaint. On Titan, methane harvesters were converted into fuel refineries. Humanity's war machine was not just mobilizing, it was awakening, faster than anyone believed possible. Across the galaxy, other species watched the feed of Hale's execution and its aftermath. The Kralin, ancient merchants, dismissed it as human posturing. "They are fragile," their elders said. "1 year, perhaps 2, and the Empire will crush them." But the Solari Confederates whispered in fear. "Did you see how they rallied? No hesitation, no mourning, only rage. That is not natural. That is dangerous." For the first time in centuries, the neutral races debated the stability of the Empire. Weeks later, President Vargas stood before a crowd in Geneva. Behind her, the first wave of new destroyers gleamed, christened in Hale's name. She wore no grand uniform, only a simple black coat. "My people," she began, her voice broadcast to every screen, every ship, every colony. "They killed our general to frighten us. Instead, they gave us a martyr. They wanted silence. Instead, they gave us a voice. They sought to weaken us. Instead, they have bound us together." The crowd roared, fists raised. Varga raised hers in return. "We do not fight for vengeance alone. We fight so our children may never kneel. We fight because submission is extinction. We fight because Hale believed in us." The chant began in Geneva but echoed across Earth, across Mars, across every station orbiting every star humanity touched. "When Earth unites, run." In the quiet of her office afterward, Varga looked at the image of Marcus Hale frozen in his final defiance. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, the grief, the enormity of what lay ahead. Admiral Kwan entered. His uniform was crisp, his expression harder than steel. "You know they'll come for us," he said. "The Empire won't tolerate defiance." "They'll come," Varga agreed. Her eyes didn't leave Hale's image. "And when they do, they'll learn what Earth truly is." Kwan nodded once, then saluted. "We'll make them regret ever thinking we were prey." On the streets of Earth, the rage had turned to discipline. Posters bearing Hale's last words plastered walls. Children practiced drills with wooden rifles. Colonies built bunkers, armed patrols, raised defenses. Humanity's grief had forged into steel. And in the silence of space, where stars burned indifferent and ancient, a new legend was already taking shape. The galaxy believed Hale's death ended a war before it began. They were wrong. It had only just begun. The first strike came not from the Empire but from humanity. In the shadow of Epsilon Eridani's red sun, a Zerathian listening post floated in silence. Its spires bristled with antennas, feeding intelligence across the Empire's frontier. For decades it had been untouchable, an outpost of a power too vast to challenge. Then, without warning, human warships dropped out of FTL. Admiral Kwan stood on the command deck of the TCS Dauntless, eyes locked on the tactical display. Green triangles marked his ships, red diamonds marked the enemy. His orders were precise: strike fast, leave nothing. "Signal the fleet," he said. His voice was calm, unshaken. "Weapons free." The void lit up. Human destroyers surged forward, releasing volleys of railgun fire. Kinetic slugs tore into the outpost's shielding, sparks bursting across its surface. Fighters swarmed, weaving between alien defenses, hurling torpedoes into its spires. The Zerathians scrambled. Defense turrets came alive, spraying plasma across the black. A cruiser clawed its way out of dock, shields flaring. For a moment it seemed the humans would falter, then the Dauntless unleashed a broadside. 8 rail cannons fired in unison, piercing the cruiser's core. The explosion painted the battlefield in white fire. Within an hour, the listening post was rubble. On the bridge, smoke still drifted from overheated systems. Kwan clasped his hands behind his back, watching the wreckage scatter into the void. "Status? All enemy signals eliminated, Admiral," a lieutenant reported. "Minimal losses. 4 ships damaged, no casualties." Kwan allowed himself a rare smile. "Good. Leave nothing intact. No survivors, no transmissions. Let the Empire wonder who struck the first blow." But survivors there were. Among the debris, a crippled shuttle was dragged aboard. The captured crew, 4 Zerathians, snarled and spat in chains. Their commander, his mandibles twitching with disdain, laughed when questioned. "You think this raid matters? Your kind is brittle. 1 year, perhaps 2, before you burn out. The Empire will break your bones, and the galaxy will forget you." Quan leaned closer, voice as cold as vacuum. 1 year is all we'll need. News of the raid spread within days. Humanity celebrated its first taste of vengeance. Across Earth, citizens cheered in the streets. Recruitment surged again. Hale's words returned to every screen. "When Earth unites, run." But the Empire did not remain silent. 2 weeks later, fire rained down on the colony of Leto 4. The Zerathian fleet descended without warning, plasma storms scarring the surface. Cities burned. Civilians fled into tunnels as alien soldiers marched through the ash, executing anyone left behind. When the attackers departed, Leto 4 was a wasteland, 500,000 dead in a single day. The Confederation broadcast the devastation to every world. Instead of fear, the massacre ignited fury. Volunteers tripled. Colonies built militias. Farmers carried rifles to their fields. Children memorized evacuation drills. Humanity did not retreat. It sharpened. In the war room beneath Geneva, President Varga studied the holomap with her generals. Admiral Quan stood at her side, his presence steady, his voice measured. "They've shown us their hand," Quan said. "Terror campaigns. They think they can break us by burning our colonies. Will it work?" Varga asked. "No," Quan replied. "They've only given us resolve. Every strike makes us stronger. Every death recruits 10 more soldiers." A general leaned forward. "Resolve is not enough. Their fleets outnumber ours 5 to 1. We need an edge." Varga's gaze shifted to the dark corner of the table, where a classified file shimmered. "Then we give them something they've never seen." The file was labeled Project Nemesis. Weeks later, at Epsilon Eridani, humanity's gamble was tested. A Zerathian fleet of 50 ships advanced on the system, intent on wiping out the newly built human base. The Confederation had only 16 ships to meet them. Outnumbered, outgunned. But for the first time, Nemesis was active. The AI flickered across the displays, a cold, faceless construct designed to process 1,000 possibilities per second. It anticipated enemy maneuvers before they were made, adjusted formations in real time, calculated sacrifices with ruthless precision. Quan's voice carried over calms. "Follow Nemesis. Hold nothing back." The battle raged. Human frigates darted forward, drawing enemy fire before veering into suicide runs that crippled larger ships. Rail slugs struck weak points Nemesis had predicted. Torpedoes slipped through openings no human pilot would have seen. By the end, debris littered the system. 30 Zerathian ships burned in the void. Humanity had lost 6, but the base still stood. Across the fleet, silence reigned. Then cheers erupted, raw and unrestrained. Humanity had faced impossible odds and prevailed. Quan's message to Varga was simple. "The AI works. The war has changed." Far across the galaxy, Archduke Verax listened to the reports in disbelief. His advisors stammered excuses, insufficient numbers, tactical anomalies, but Verax saw the truth: humans had become a threat. He rose from his throne, his voice venomous. "If they will not bow, they will bleed. Execute every human prisoner. Leave their corpses for the stars." The order rippled through the Empire. Camps filled with captured soldiers and civilians turned into slaughterhouses. Tens of thousands perished. The broadcasts reached Earth within days. For a moment, silence gripped the world. Then, fury unlike any before. President Varga stood before the Confederation, her voice iron. "We will not forgive. We will not forget. From this moment, there will be no surrender, no retreat. The war ends only with humanity's survival, or the Empire's ruin." The chamber erupted in unanimous approval. Humanity had crossed the threshold. This was no longer resistance. This was annihilation. On the deck of the Dauntless, Admiral Quan addressed his officers after the battle. His eyes swept over faces hardened by loss, voices silent with expectation. "We've bled today," he said quietly. "And we'll bleed tomorrow. But listen well, every drop we spill is another step closer to tearing their empire apart. They thought Hale's death would break us. Instead, they'd forged us into something stronger. Something relentless." He paused, letting the silence settle. "They've started a war they cannot finish. And we will be the ones to prove it." The officers saluted, eyes blazing. In that moment, Quan knew humanity had embraced the flames. And the fire would only spread. The war had reached its breaking point. For months, the Zerathian Empire had hurled fleets into human space, but Nemesis countered every thrust. Battles once thought unwinnable ended in bloody stalemates or shocking victories. Supply lines bled under constant raids. Colonies the Empire thought pacified turned into nests of insurgents. Yet the cost was steep. Human fleets bore scars from every encounter. Cities across Earth dug graves for soldiers who would never return. The Confederation knew the war could not drag on forever. If humanity was to survive, it needed a single, decisive strike. The target was clear: Zerolon Prime, the Empire's capital. Inside the War Council chamber beneath Geneva, President Vargas studied the holographic projection. The planet glowed in the center, ringed with defense stations and fleet icons. Her generals stood grim and silent, while Nemesis flickered as a shifting lattice of blue light. "This is madness," one general muttered. "Their defenses are impenetrable." Admiral Quan's voice was steady. "No fortress is impenetrable. Not if we're willing to pay the price." Nemesis spoke for the first time, its tone eerily calm. "Probability of success, 42% with current assets. Probability of survival of the human species if the war continues without this strike, 14%. The chamber fell into silence. Vargas' gaze hardened. "Then the choice is made. Operation Wrath proceeds. Humanity will not live in chains." The fleet gathered at the edge of the Orion Arm, hundreds of ships forged in desperation, crewed by volunteers who knew many would never return. Destroyers bristled with rail guns, carriers loaded with swarms of fighters, troop transports prepared for boarding actions. On the Dauntless, Admiral Quan addressed the assembled captains through the comms. "We stand on the edge of history," he said. "They executed General Hale to break us. Instead, they united us. Today, we take this war to their heart. Many of us will not live to see Earth again, but if we succeed, humanity will never kneel to anyone." He raised his fist. Across the fleet, voices roared in answer. The order was given. The fleet leapt into FTL. Zerolon Prime filled the viewscreens, an ocean world crowned with glittering towers, ringed by steel and fire. Orbit bristled with stations, cannons, and a fleet twice the size of humanity's. The Empire had gathered everything to defend its core. Admiral Quan's jaw tightened. "All ships weapons free. Nemesis, take command." The void exploded into war. Nemesis orchestrated with inhuman precision. Human frigates darted like knives, punching holes in enemy formations. Fighters swarmed through the chaos, weaving between alien shields to strike at engines and reactors. Carriers sacrificed themselves as decoys, buying seconds for the fleet to close. But the Empire struck back with fury. Plasma storms carved through human destroyers, vaporizing crews in an instant. Entire squadrons vanished in fire. Yet for every ship lost, the humans dragged two of the enemy with them. Inside the capital, Archduke Verax watched from his throne room as reports poured in. His mandibles clicked in disbelief. "They're hurling themselves at us like animals. It makes no sense." A trembling advisor stammered. "They're not fighting to win territory, Your Grace. They're fighting to kill you." On the Dauntless, alarms blared. Hull breaches ripped through the lower decks, but Quan stood unflinching. Nemesis pulsed across the displays, calculating, adapting. "Target their command station," Quan ordered. "Cut off the head, the body dies." A squadron of troop transports broke formation, plunging through enemy fire toward the planet. Boarding teams stormed defense hubs, planting charges and seizing control of orbital guns. One by one, the stations turned, their cannons firing not at the humans but at their former masters. The tide shifted. The capital fleet faltered. Verax's image flashed onto human channels, his jeweled armor glinting, his voice filled with rage. "You are mad! You would burn the galaxy itself for vengeance!" Quan answered, voice flat as iron. "Not the galaxy. Just you." Nemesis unleashed its final command. Human battleships poured every last round into the planet's shields. Fighters crashed themselves into generators. Then the orbital guns, now under human control, fired in unison. The shields collapsed. Orbital bombardment rained down. Towers shattered, oceans boiled, the capital's surface burned. The heart of the Empire was broken. Verax fled into the depths of his citadel, but it was too late. His empire fractured as vassal races rose in rebellion. Without its fleet, without its capital, the Zerathian dominion crumbled in days. The human fleet, battered and bloodied, limped away victorious. Out of hundreds of ships, barely half returned. But they had done the impossible, they had slain an empire. Weeks later, Earth stood in mourning and triumph. The dead were honored in every city, their names carved into monuments. But it was Marcus Hale who stood at the center of remembrance. A colossal memorial rose in Geneva, his likeness cast in steel, head lifted in defiance. At its base were his final words carved deep into stone. "When Earth unites, run." President Varga addressed the gathering, her voice carrying across the world. "We were underestimated, dismissed as fragile, told we would break. But humanity does not break. We endure. We rise. And when the galaxy sought to test us, we showed them what it means to be human." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Let this be remembered, not as the end of a war, but as the beginning of our place among the stars. We are not subjects. We are not prey. We are humanity, and we are free." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Children raised their fists, soldiers saluted, and across the galaxy, species both fearful and awed watched the broadcast. In the quiet afterward, Admiral Quan stood before Hale's memorial. His uniform was torn, his body weary, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried them through the war. He whispered to the statue, almost to himself. "We did it, Marcus. You were right. When Earth unites, they run." Above, the stars stretched endless and silent. But the silence had changed. Where once the galaxy saw Earth as fragile, now they saw it as something far more dangerous. Not a world to conquer. A power to fear.